I'll be telling you two stories of the hidden folk, the Huldnbfolk. And one is from here in California and one is from Iceland. We'll start right here in a park outside of Riverside, Mount Rubidoux Park. You know it?
I do.
Love it. So Mitch was a young boy in his 4th grade class, and the whole class, they were on a field trip at Mount Rubidoux Park, and Mitch, who was the smallest boy in his class, he was standing under the shade of a big oak tree up on Mount Rubidoux Park, right by a babbling brook. It was a windy day, winds blowing the leaves around. And you know, Mitch, it was hard for him to hear his teacher. He was at the back of the class, his teacher's way up front, and it was hard to hear him because, you know, it was windy, and because the little creek is babbling. And I don't know if you can even imagine this, but there were like a lot of voices in the background, like children talking and screaming. So it was hard to hear her over all these voices in the background. And so he was trying to hear his teacher at the front of the class, but all the students, they're all shouting and joking around and not paying attention. But he was straining to hear, but he was also trying to stay away from the crowd because he was the smallest boy in class. He was actually a year ahead of everyone else. He was a smart kid. So they made him skip a year, but that meant he was the smallest physically. And that meant that bullies like Justin, the kid who had to do kindergarten 2 extra years and was the biggest boy in class and was right up at the front of the group with his 2 toadies standing on either side of him. That meant that people like Justin went after people like Mitch. So someone like Mitch, he stayed at the back of the crowd. He stayed back there and just tried to stay out of sight and be quiet. And he just stayed there under that oak tree and just listened to the wind. And he listened to the teacher talking about the history of Mount Rubidoux Park. And she's talking about how the Miller family, the old rich family from Riverside, they built that park. And how legend says that there are tunnels going underneath the park. And then Mitch heard Justin's voice up at the front. Justin saying, "Oh, there's tunnels under here. Let's go and start digging. Let's see if there's any booze left under there." And his 2 toadies started laughing. And Mitch just kind of shrunk at the back of the crowd. And the teacher, she said, "You know, the history of this park, though, it goes back a lot further than Prohibition and the Miller family. In fact, there were Luiseno native settlements in this park. And there are places like right where we're standing, in fact, right where Mitch is standing over there." And she pointed at Mitch, and Mitch said, "Oh," she pointed me out. Right next to Mitch at the back there, you can see some stones, some grinding stones. They're called metates. And you can see those grinding stones because there's a river here, there are oak trees, there's acorns. So the Luiseno people would grind on the grinding stones, but metate is the word. And then Mitch, he heard Justin say, "May, what, May Titty? This stone's called a May Titty? What kind of a name is that?" And Mitch, he thought, no wonder he had to stay in kindergarten for 2 extra years. This kid's not right. But I just hope she doesn't point at me again. And then the teacher said, "Now, Justin, calm down. Calm down, Justin. We're talking about history here. This was a sacred place. A place where there's water running by, where there are oak trees, there's food, there's acorns, and there are the metates. That's a place that's holy and sacred." And, you know, the Luiseno people, they said they were guardians. They looked like little tiny people, they said. These guardians protect the waterways, and they protect the trees and the stones. But if you saw these guardians, they called them the koyul. They might look like a little tiny man, like a dwarf about a foot tall. And then all of a sudden, everyone heard Justin say, "Look out! Look out!" And everyone turned and looked, and Justin's pointing at the back of the class, and he's pointing at Mitch. He's saying, "There's one right now! It's one of the little gnomes! Look at how tiny he is!" And everyone laughed, and Mitch just shrunk up more. And the teacher said, "All right, Justin, I want to talk to you after class. Let's keep walking, students." And everyone starts walking. And Mitch, he just kind of waited a little bit, and he looked around, and he thought, he wondered what life was like back in those Luiseno days. He wondered if there were bullies back then, too. He's just hanging at the back, and then he heard Justin's voice behind him, saying, "What are you looking at, Midge?" So Justin called him Midge. It's a play on words of the word midget. Justin was very cruel. Justin said, "Midge, what are you staying back here? You looking for a friend back here?" And his 2 toadies were standing behind him. And he walked up to Mitch, and he said, "You got to do something before we go back with the rest of the class." And he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a Sharpie pen. He said, "Go up there and tag that May Titty, tag that rock." write your name on it. Let's see if you're man enough to do it. And Mitch, he said, no, that's an artifact. Of course, if you say a word like artifact in front of bullies, they're going to laugh at you. It's too much of a smart people word. And Justin, he said, just go tag it, or unless you're chicken. If you don't do it, we're going to tell everyone you peed your pants back here, and that's why you stayed back. And Justin, he took that pen, he said, you know what, look, I'll do it first. I'm going to write my name on this rock. Once I put my autograph on it, then it'll really be worth something. And his toadies, they're holding on to Mitch's arms on either side so he can't get away. And Justin, he got up on that rock, and he uncapped that pen, and he started to write. And then one of the toadies, the one to the right of Mitch, he hears him say, ow! What was that? And then the other toadie on his left says, ow! Who's doing that? And Mitch, he looked and he saw blood dripping off their face. And then Justin says, oh! What is... Just a rock came flying out of the woods and hit Justin right in the face. Blood's dripping down. And another rock comes and hits him in the neck. And these rocks, they're flying out of the woods. They're hitting the two toadies, and they're hitting Justin. Somehow they're all missing Mitch, though. They're not touching him at all. And these rocks are flying from all over the place. And these three boys are running back and saying, what's happening? As soon as Justin got off of the rock, all the rocks stopped flying out of the woods. Everything went calm again. Mitch, he looked at these three boys and he saw them pale, fear, blood running down their face, staining their shirts. And they just looked at him. They said, were you the one? Were you doing it? And then all four of them looked at the woods because they heard a twig snap. And in the woods they saw faces, little tiny dark faces, standing in the trees, covered in whiskers, wrinkled, old as the trees. Little men about a foot tall, all standing there, staring at them, kind of like people, but not quite people. And the men smiled, and they had teeth too long and too sharp to be people's teeth. And they all ran off and got back to the class after that. But ever since then, Justin never called Mitch Midge again, and never made fun of him for being the smallest boy in class. Now we'll go back to Iceland. There are stories like that of similar guardians of nature, small people, little people in Iceland. There's a word for elves in Iceland. It sounds like the word for elf, but many people, they just call them the hidden folk. Huldnbfolk, the hidden folk. Do people say that in Danish at all? Is there a word like that? Nothing? Okay, it might be unique to Iceland.
No, Norwegian.
Norwegian, okay. So then there's also an Anglo-Saxon tale of the natural order of things, and one of these verses I'll read right now before this. Sjur sjálum hjófunum winda blondin thar weorul kumman. The storm must blow, wrought with fierce winds, and blow through the earth. The thief is destined to walk abroad in the dark, stormy weather. And the demon must live in the dark fen, alone on the land. So in Iceland, long ago, there was a man, Jan, and he was sort of a wanderer. He never inherited any land, and he just kind of liked to wander from village to village. He came upon one small village. It was actually just one farmhouse. Everyone lived in that farm. And it was, as soon as he got here, he learned it was actually New Year's Eve. He had lost track of time. He didn't even realize that. And he came up and he saw everybody was sad, which is strange for New Year's Eve. It's a happy time. He asked, why did somebody just die? What happened? They told him, well, we'd like to go celebrate. We'd like to go to the church and celebrate. But we need to leave somebody here watching over the farmhouse. And every time we do that, every year that we've left someone watching, we come back and that person is missing. They disappear and they never come back. And Jan, he said, what? Every year they're missing? They said, well, one year the person was still here, but he'd gone out of his mind. He couldn't even speak after that. He couldn't tell us what he saw that New Year's Eve. So something comes here, something dark comes to this house. We don't know what it is. Jan, he said, well, I don't really believe in those things, so I'll stay and watch if you want. If you like, you give me some food in exchange, sure. So he did. And they all went to church, to that midnight mass, and Yanni stayed in the farmhouse. But he pulled some of the wooden boards off the wall. back by the closet, and he hid back in there. There was a little space, and he pulled those boards back and covered up so he could just stay in there and watch what was happening. Sure enough, at midnight, a crowd of people, they looked like people, came down from the mountains and came into that farmhouse. He had left a little lamp going. He saw the people come in. He could understand them. They were speaking Icelandic, actually. And he could understand what they were saying. They said, "It still smells like humans in here." And then someone else said, "Well, the humans just left. Of course it smells like them." And he was a little worried, but then they pulled out musical instruments, and they pulled out their treasure. They all had treasure in their clothes. They pulled it out and set it down. They started playing and dancing and playing music on their instruments. And he thought, hey, maybe these Huldnbfolk aren't so bad after all. They like to celebrate like we do, New Year's. And he watched them all celebrating, but then they said, wait, we need a watchman. We need someone to watch. What if the sun comes up and surprises us? So they had one of their young boys that sent him over by the door. They said, you watch for the sun. At that point, one of the dogs in the farmhouse came barking up, came running toward the house, and one of the Huldnbfolk picked up the dog, and he threw the dog against a tree, and the dog fell to the ground with a little whimper. And then Jan said, you know what, I don't think these guys are so cool after all. And he just stood and stayed there behind those planks and watched everything happening, thinking, how am I going to get out of here? And he's watching them all dance and sing and drink, and they got more and more noisy and more raucous as the night's going on. And Jan is thinking, what am I going to do? And then he thought of an idea, so that every now and then they would call it to the watch boy, is the sun coming up yet? The watch boy would say, no, not yet. Not even close. We still have time. It's still dark. And they called out a second time, a third time. And the fourth time they called out, Jan shouted from behind the boards, he said, oh, thank God the sun's coming up at last! And when the Huldnbfolk heard the name of God mentioned, well, they all scattered. They went running. They thought, this watchman, he wasn't watching for the sun. They went running out, and one of them picked the boy up, threw him against the same tree, and he crumpled to the ground. The rest of them ran off into the hills, and they left their treasure on the ground in the farmhouse. Well, Yanni collected it all in a pile. The humans came back the next morning, and he showed them all and told them what happened. He said, here's the treasure. They've all left it behind. And the humans, they said, well, you know, Jan, that's all yours. You've earned it. Take it. Do whatever you like with it. So Yanni took that treasure, and he bought himself a farm near that town. And he became friends with those folks. He settled down at last. And they would always share the story of the Huldnbfolk, the hidden folk who came down from the mountain. And they could tell that story and enjoy it because they no longer feared those Huldnbfolk who never dared to come invade the farmhouse ever again after that. The Huldnbfolk.